View from the Gutters, episode 81. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss Queen and Country, Volume 1, and, to skip ahead to the recommendation section, skip to 1 hour, 43 seconds.
All right, so are we ready to go? Or are we recording?
Yeah, I'm ready. What episode is this?
It's 81.
Literally start every episode like that. I need to stop. Yeah.
And it's also her...
Oh, yeah, did you want to make... Did you want to...
No,
I'll do you want to blow our level? Well, first of all, I'm Andrew Chard.
I'm Tobias Panshin.
I'm Brant Gillihan-Eddy.
And I'm Kate Reynolds.
And I feel like I've kind of taken the role of making announcements. Since
Yeah,
I'm usually the one who remembers shit.
Yeah, that's not me. That's for sure.
So this is episode 81. However, if you include every episode that we've released, all the long runs, the back matters, the bonus episodes, the point nows, this is our 100th recorded and released regular episode of the show.
Yeah.
Not counting top of the stack.
Right.
So
audio shows, yeah.
Happy kind of 100th episode, everybody.
Yay.
Chard, insert like a noisemaker or a horn or something in here.
Let's put the quack in again.
I have no belief
fine.
that that's going to happen because if I remember correctly, there was an entire section that he said, I'm not going to let this play on the podcast. I'm cutting it out, which I listened to earlier today.
Yeah, I say, I'm not going to lie, I say that a lot, and then I just leave it in.
Announcement number 2, Rose City Comic Con is happening September 20th and 21st in Portland, and we got media passes.
We'll be there.
We've fucking arrived.
Come say hello to us.
Big time. So yeah, we're going to be in Portland that weekend. If you are also in Portland, say hi to us if you see us on the floor. And if you're a comic creator and you want to talk to us, send us an email. Contact you from the Gutters. We'll set up an interview or something.
Yeah, we have. We'll probably have a little mobile recording unit with us, and so we might grab some sound clips if people want to come up and talk to us and tell us what they're reading. That would be cool, and we can throw a little clip segues in between our coverage of that event because we'll do regular con episodes.
We're gonna do a con report like we've done for Emerald City the last couple of years.
Yeah. So.
All right, and then I have an announcement
that
ties into my recommendation from last week.
The Kickstarter.
And the announcements that we put on the website. The Kickstarter was funded. There are stretch goals up now. And also he added a new tier for $8 that is also an add-on. He created an RPG not source book, but add-on for...
Like a setting book?
Yeah, for Pariah, Missouri, that you just plug into any system you use and it's good to go.
Cool.
Sweet.
I thought that was really cool. And
That's
it's something
cool.
I'm going to look into.
Not something you see very often from comic books, but very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what are we talking about this week?
Queen and Country, Volume 1, Operation Broken Ground by Greg Rucka and Steve Rolston.
I don't remember.
That sounds right.
But with beautiful covers by Tim Sale.
Yes.
Which I forgot about.
Does he do the cover for all the graphics?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
He did the images. He did the covers for the first 5 issues.
First 5 or first 4?
First 4.
It is Steve Rolston.
Steve Rolston.
Steve
Rolston.
Is it only 4 issues?
Rolston?
Yeah, the first trade is only 4 issues.
Why do I always think it's 5?
Well,
if you read the 0.5 issue first, it's 5.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think that's actually in
It's not in the trade.
Not in the trade.
It's however good.
You pitched Queen and Country.
I did.
On the reread, because I know you read this before.
Yeah, a few times.
How did you feel about it?
I like it. I continue to like it. Something I don't talk a lot about, even amongst my closer friends, I realize, is that I'm actually a big, international espionage and spy person.
You're a spy?
Yes, I am a spy.
That's on the air.
I'm working from the James Bond school of spy, where I basically just tell everybody who I am, and I'll expect that they'll either die or want to make love to me in some sort of randy way.
It's both.
I seem to recall a conversation from when we first met that you had intentions of going into military intelligence that did not come to fruition, and that you went to... the college that we met at instead.
It's true.
It, quote unquote didn't come to fruition.
Right, right. Quote unquote.
As far as I know.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was a big thing in my house. My father actually was an intelligence person for a long time. So the Cold War was kind of a very big and present thing in my life. And so it always just kind of, I think from there, it's so, and of course my dad's like a big James Bond and action movie nut. So I like a lot of this stuff. And what drew me to Queen and Country was actually, I actually found Greg Rucka completely absent comic books. I came across one of his Atticus Kodiak novels, Keeper, I believe, first.
Those are his. He's not a private detective. He's a bodyguard.
Yeah,
right?
well, they start where he's a bodyguard, and then he kind of gets embroiled in more international intrigue stuff, which I have to imagine is in part because Greg Rucka was spending so much time with his head in Queen and Country for so long that I think it kind of just naturally led the Atticus Kodiak stuff there. But it isn't quite this. It isn't the same, and Rucka makes a lot of unique things. So, but anyway, I found it. It was one of the first times that I had seen this topic handled in comics in a very just kind of straight up way, without superheroes and anything else. And so that's what got me hooked. And then I've been into the series ever since. The only thing the one thing that I always struggle with this particular volume is that of all the volumes of Queen and Country, I think this is the one with the most jarring art to narrative balance.
That is something that I was actually going to bring up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That, compared to any of the other artists he works with, this is the one that feels the most like out of place. Mm-hmm. And
sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and I mean, I think it still succeeds. Ultimately, I still like the book. 7 trades and 3 novels later, I own them all in my house, and I'm seriously thinking of going back and replacing all of my graphic novels with the hardcover prestige formats they've made for these. So, and I don't do that for series. So obviously, it's hooked me in a very particular way. But I can acknowledge, as somebody who's sensitive, I think I said this in the podcast maybe a couple of episodes ago, that I'm somebody who has broad tastes artistically. So when I get jarred by art, it's usually pretty significant for me. And so...
Well, my major complaint, and having read all of the rest of Queen and Country, like, this isn't a problem that goes forward. If this is something that you saw, listeners out there, and that concerned you, Steve Rolston's art, it's not bad. But his characters are kind of embellished in sort of a cartoony way.
Right.
Their features are sort of distended. And I don't feel like he's necessarily the best at conveying dynamic action on the page.
It feels very static.
Which is something that that's something that's difficult to do. You have to be a very good artist to really convey dynamic action on a comic book page. And I feel like it's a weakness of this first trade that you don't really get that when you kind of want a little bit of that, especially in that first issue, which I think is even the weakest of the 4 issues in the first trade. Mm-hmm. I think it gets a little bit better later on. But as you said, Brant, it is kind of jarring. It doesn't quite mesh, which is a shame because Rucka's writing is so strong right out of the gate and continues to be strong, that it doesn't have necessarily the best jumping off point from the first volume.
Yeah, I've tried to read this series several times, and this is the first time I've ever gotten through the first trade because the art destroys it for me.
Yeah.
Like, the first time I tried to read this series, I had read Whiteout, and I was like, this is one of the greatest things I've ever read. Like, I still love Whiteout to this day. And I was like, I'm going to read everything that Rucka's written. Like, this is crazy. I picked up this volume, and I was like, I can't read this. Like, the art it's very amateurish.
It feels webcomic-y to me.
If you ever look at, like, a lot of old indie stuff, or if you've ever met any writers who are trying to meet artists, young artists who are trying to break into the industry and stuff, and you get, like, sample pages, or if you've looked at a lot of, like, really amateur art and stuff, it looks like this. Like, it's not dynamic. Everything feels really stilted and static. The faces aren't nearly as expressive as they could be.
They're also kind of samey.
Yeah, it's hard to tell what the character's thinking based on their facial expression because they don't have a facial expression. They just have a face. Like, that's the face that they are wearing. And I find that there are moments in this book which should be dramatic. Like, Tara's alone in her apartment waiting for Russians to come kill her. She wants to drink. She can't drink. She's alone. All she has is this walkie-talkie. She's pacing around her apartment. She's doing pull-ups on the doorway. She's just, she's trapped in this environment because she's bait. And it doesn't have the emotional punch that it should because the art isn't strong enough.
You know what I'm wondering about is I wonder if who did the... It's funny. I'm looking at the first trade, and the designs in the back, some of the design work, it's not all the same artist. But the pencils, if you look at the pencils, for those of you at home, I'm showing the pages to my cohorts here.
And this is the soft cover, individual trades, right. Not the new ones.
Like they're more rough, and it's almost like I wish they would have kept that.
Yeah.
Like part of it is that they made it so clean.
Yeah.
That it really diminishes in some senses. Like
we've talked about kind of the 2001 period where this came out as being a very transitional time for comic books, the way that comic books look, and I think that this is a part of that.
Absolutely,
and you don't get the same level of it that you do with color art because this is when digital coloring was coming in. But I do think that it still plays a role.
Well, and I think this is also in that formative period where Image was certainly not the powerhouse that it is now. This
is Oni Press.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Image was not the powerhouse it was to create an environment where people could kind of get their own stuff out. So I imagine that Oni Press, being a small press...
they're really small. They're
being
very
really
local.
small probably gave Greg very limited resources to work with. So, I know that he wanted to work with Rolston, and I think they wanted to work on this, but he clearly had scope and imagination for things much bigger, as his career has proven, and even the series itself proves.
And also the point, what I was, I guess building towards was, Brant's right. Like this was a different time in indie comics, and where now there are like so many indie comic book artists that are willing to work on indie books and are like, I want an Image book, I want to do self-published stuff. In the 2000s, there was still all the best artists were like, no, I want to work for Marvel and DC. Why would I do an indie book?
Right.
Like, there's no reason to do that.
Where's the money or the prestige in that?
Right. And now people can see that, that there is a lot of money and prestige in that, and that that's become the future of comics. But in the early 2000s, that was still a long way away.
Right.
And it's something we talked about on Hawaiian Dick was it feels like an older indie book. And it's dated by the art and by... the writing is just none of it is as polished, I think, as it could have been.
Okay, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think Brant's going to remember for me. What's the line that Ben Affleck gives to Matt Damon in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back? First you do the money picture,
then you do the art picture, and then you do the gay riding around on horses picture. Hey, man. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that even today there's still a bit of Marvel and DC are where you go to get your paycheck. Image and the smaller presses are where you go to do your prestige work. You go to do your artistic work.
And I think that that's becoming less and less every year because
yes, it is changing, but I think that that's still the case even today and was more the case back then.
Absolutely. Greg Rucka was working for Marvel at this point, right? I believe.
Yes.
Doing Elektra.
He did the Wolverine miniseries.
And he's a successful novelist, lest we forget. I mean, the guy's a New York Times bestselling author, and he was before he started any of his comics career. So he certainly wasn't. And I think that's probably why he was able to get even Oni to get on board with something. He's like, because he had done Whiteout at that point.
Yes.
Both of them?
Just the first
one.
Just the first
that had done well. And, I'm not as... Part of it's probably just a love affair with the fact that I love the series so much. I love the characterization. Could Rucka have written this better? I'm sure on some day he could have.
I'm sure even now he looks back at this and is like, I could have.
Yeah, I could have. But
because
I think
that's how artists
that's how hindsight works.
Yeah, and that's specifically how artists work.
But I think especially for its subject matter, even now it stands as being relatively sophisticated and hard to match. I mean, there's not really... I'm staring at the board for... Top of the stack. And are there any other international espionage books that come out on a regular basis?
Certainly not at this level.
Black Widow.
Well, that's a very recent.
Well, yeah.
And even then, it's still got a weird. No. I know. And I mean, straight up.
No, it's the Black Widow, the Nathan Edmondson, Phil Noto Black Widow is very. it's as real world as you can get, I think, with a character like Black Widow, where yet she's yet to face like major super villains. I mean, she's taken down like, Marvel Mafia guy, like it's still Marvel stuff, but it feels more like an espionage book. It actually, I think if you like this Queen and Country, you should read the Black Widow that's coming out.
I think that
it's
Black
handled
Widow
similarly
book,
to this.
I think that owes a debt to Queen and Country.
I agree.
I think that Queen and Country was so big and so the way it was, that it is one of those things that will influence everything that comes after that, as far as international espionage comics.
Well, and I think that Brand brings up a good point, is like no one's really decided to write a real world espionage comic, the ongoing series now, and I think a lot of the reason is like, well, why? We have Queen and Country.
Like, we haven't for a long time.
But we have a book that does it so well that like it would almost be.
Well, I mean, I don't know about that argument, because I mean, there's James Bond movies that come out every year, but people still make James Bond like movies. I mean, there's
no.
But I mean, I think you're right. I think part of the challenge is that you have to have a certain.
I think that they make action movies, but I think that no studio is like, let's make a film series about a British spy who's like sexy and dangerous, and we'll just continue to make those as an ongoing.
But you have.
Didn't the BBC do a TV show about that for like?
Yeah, that's what I was just getting ready to say.
Spooks, right? Well, MI5 in the US.
Spooks, MI5, yeah.
It's the same show.
Well, and of course, this is based off of a British. Yeah. He says that his inspiration is the Sandbaggers, I believe, which is another British show. I mean, of course, and it makes sense, right? Like we have shows in America like Homeland, which is about the CIA,
right?
So we have our show,
or Alias.
Alias.
Rubicon, which is a show that no one knows about, but I loved.
Oh.
It was an AMC show that got canceled after the first season, but it was like...
I have actually heard very, very great things
it's
about
cool.
that
He's like a CIA reader. He like sifts information for the CIA, kind of like Robert Redford in 3 Days of the Condor. But it's just like he uncovers this huge government conspiracy.
Nice.
And it was cool. It was a cool show, and it got canceled to make room for The Walking Dead. Yay!
So I wanted to mention... my biggest gripe about this book, and it actually wasn't the art, because like I do see where you guys are coming from as far as the art goes. I didn't see that when I was reading it, but looking back on it, it always helps to talk about comics to understand them more.
That's the whole point of the show.
Exactly.
No, I refuse to talk about comics here. Oh wait,
because sometimes like I'll have a lot different viewpoints about the book after we've talked about it for an hour and a half than I did going into it.
I don't, because I'm stubborn.
Well, I mean, it's certainly true for me. I've been re-examining how I feel about The Wake since we had our conversation about it.
Yeah, I'm stubborn.
And that, I mean...
There's other words for that,
I know them all.
But my biggest problem with this book was that it was not long enough.
Well, I mean, it is. We just only read the first trade, right?
Well, yes.
Or do you mean that, like, the story feel like it needed...
the story in the first trade wasn't long enough. I read the whole thing in, like, 15, 20 minutes, and I was like, that's it? Where's the rest? Like...
Well,
is it...
I'll tell you a secret, having read the whole thing. The whole plot line with the assassination of, was it Markovsky? Like, that does not end here. That is something that keeps biting in the ass for years afterwards, which is one of the things that I love about Queen and Country. And I don't want to get too much into the other volumes, especially if we do a long run on this at some point.
Which we should.
One of the things that I love about this series is that they do something, and then that comes to bite them in the ass, and they have to do something more extreme to deal with that. And then there's this constant sense of consequences and escalation that happens.
Yeah.
I guess I just feel that these 4 issues could have been 6 issues, and we learned more stuff.
I think,
although we say that a lot,
my question,
I feel like this isn't a full trade.
My question to you, I guess, is: does it feel like the story needs more room to breathe? Like, do you feel like it's just happening too fast, or do you feel like not enough information is given to you? Like, not enough events are occurring.
That's a good question, and I don't really know. I felt that these 4 issues were too quick.
Yeah.
And I felt like if you're, getting a trade, you should get more than that.
I think that may have to do with the era in which it was released.
Yeah, and the
very
fact
possible.
That he didn't necessarily know how much of this was ever going to get published, because the first issue very much feels like a standalone story.
And
the 3 issues after that feel like a follow-up to that story. that then concludes on a point where you can go like, okay, well, that's the end.
That being said, though, Greg is one of the only people that I can think of, like, readily that writes a 4-issue story arc, like, in an ongoing series. Like, most people are like 3 or 5 or 6.
I think there's a lot of interesting things because the next
Lazarus was a 4-issue arc.
Yeah, I think he likes that number to a certain extent, but the second volume is 6 issues.
But similar to Lazarus, the second trade is 5.
Yeah.
So it's a 4-issue arc, then a 5-issue arc.
I feel like based on I can't claim to be best friends with the guy, but I have had an opportunity to meet him publicly and privately, and I've read a lot of his stuff.
Friends.
Yeah, we're super BFFs. The impression I've got is that, one of the things that inspired him with this series was episodic television. Right?
Yeah.
The Sandbaggers is a very, there may be a couple of episodes. And then the other thing I was going to say was, it's not that it wasn't happening at all up until this point, but I think that Greg brings something to the table, and it's very evident in this series, about long-form character building that is still somewhat unique to major label comics. I mean, it's more... I'm talking not about necessarily continuity, but about there being kind of an overarching plot and then small plots happening within it.
The slow burn character.
Yeah, which is actually a better... I think a lot of people have found that to be one of the more appealing aspects of British television, right? It's very fixed. There are fixed stories... and a limited number of episodes, but there's like individual episodes, but there's something that's dragging out through all of the episodes, where American television, especially before Lost and a couple of other shows, it was like they would be in syndication and you wouldn't necessarily know which one happened in which order because they would almost never refer to another issue.
There was a long transitional process between the time when syndication was king, like you were writing for syndication, and you didn't know what order things were going to be on. And the situation that we have now with what do they call it? Premier quality, not like above network, like your HBOs, your A&Es,
right.
like that. The people
I know
who
what
are,
you mean, yeah.
Yeah, the people who are doing 10 and 12 episode seasons with high production values,
right.
And you have the short run season with the meta plot that develops across the entire season.
Well, and I think that my argument for this is format. I agree with Toby that it took a while for them to transition, and it was the advent of technology that really changed it. Because you never would go buy VHS tapes of an entire season of.
Well, you would. It was just ridiculous.
But it was expensive, right? And so, it wasn't. Not all shows made it to VHS, right? And when you would collect shows, especially kids shows and stuff, because that's when I remember buying VHS tapes of shows, was they would only put out it's a 5-episode VHS, and they're related, but they're not in order,
they're not tied to some greater myth.
And now that you have the DVD, it's no one's going to watch Lost out of order.
Yeah.
That would be ridiculous. You just go to DVD 1 and put it in, and you start there, right? So,
well, and I guess what I was saying about what I was trying to get at with this is that I think that in some ways Rucka has a natural tendency to do this in this series because he approaches it from a novel, right? Where he has more time. He's done some comics work and he's done some novel work, and I think he's trying to juggle both in kind of a unique way. So the next trade's more issues than this one. The next one after that is a little bit less. It varies in length, and I think it's because he's trying to pace himself, because he obviously has this very interesting idea with working with specific artists for specific arcs, yet still trying to maintain some narrative consistency with the characters, right? The characters are the same, but he's using different visual cues. And then, of course, he would turn around and got to a point where he's like, I have too much to say. I need to write a book because I can't say, it'll take 1 million trades before I could get 200 pages worth of text out. So I can see what you're saying, but I also feel like I said with The Wake, and I was just postulating there, I have the impression, based on things that Greg has said, that he wanted you to feel kind of abrupt at the end of this, because for Tara, it's abrupt.
Yeah.
That is fair.
The whole notion of this existence is a very abrupt and chaotic one, and so I think that's why he's doing the visual change that way. Because I don't think there was a delay between issue 4 and 5 publishing.
I have no idea.
So I think by the time by the time issue 4 was hitting, he knew he had more. He had more in the pipe. I don't remember there being a delay.
I think I was in high school when this was coming out, so I have no idea. I was not reading single issues at all.
I just had a very weird thought, and I don't know that it connects to anything, but I've heard it commented at one point by a comic writer, and I can't remember who it was, but someone relatively well known who is saying something to the effect of like the perfect length for a piece of dialogue in a comic book is 10 words. Like one word balloon, like one panel, one word balloon, 10 words. It's a very quick, very brief medium. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's some level of confluence that either exists or will exist in the future between writing for comic books and writing for Twitter. It's just your comment about like the length of a book versus what you can do in a comic book and like the ultra short form, and because you really are compressing things into the fewest words possible.
I think that there's a balance between that though, because I think people often are tempted to write like that, like, oh, this word balloon, 10 words, quick quips, like that's what this comic medium is all about. And I can see that, but I find that to be analogous to saying, like, in a movie, the perfect length for a cut is 5 seconds. It's like, it works sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But sometimes you need a long shot, right?
No,
like,
every
sometimes
rule
you need,
is there to be broken.
Right? And I think that there are guys who balance that this is going to be a page with a lot of dialogue better than others. I look back at Kevin Smith's first attempt at Daredevil when he wrote the... Cade, what was the name of it?
Oh, the Guardian Devil.
Guardian Devil, thank you. You can't see the art because there's so too many word balloons, right? Because he's not used to writing comics.
Also, conversely, you can't see the art because Toby would tear it up because it's Joe Quesada.
Right. Well,
I don't have a problem with Joe Quesada.
Because I like Quesada stuff.
I don't like him as an editor-in-chief. I have no problem with his artwork.
Well, I've shown you pictures of like his Captain America and stuff, and you have torn the shit out of it. Where you're just like, his chest is too big and it's in the wrong spot.
Are you sure you're not thinking about Rob Liefeld?
Chest.
No, we were talking about the New Avengers.
Don't remember that conversation.
Anyway,
you have to show it to me again.
He's grumpy so often. He just
it's hard to remember.
Yeah, I mean, if you want me to think of one specific instance where I fucking hated something, good luck.
I think that there are other artists or writers who balance the idea that like I'm going to get a lot of text on the page, and that is conveyed to the artist, and so the way that they lay out the page is different. Like you often see Bendis use the side panel for text, right, and the art is happening in between. But the whole side of the page is text, right? I think that there's ways to balance that. Well, I think that you find in European comics that there's a lot more dialogue than there is in American comics.
Claremont is famous for having tons of dialogue in his comic.
Yeah, and I think that that's an era thing because you look at Stan Lee writing Spider-Man, and it's like, and now I'm going to go over there to that water tower, and then there's vultures over... And it's like, yeah, I can see that, Stan. It's on the fucking page. You don't have to tell me that and show me that.
The infamous thought bubbles.
But it's because the art was done first, and so the writer didn't often have a lot to do in the Marvel method. So to fill space, they would just tell you what's happening. And it's great. Stan Lee, you're a great writer. No, you're not. You're just telling me what's happening on the page. These other guys did all the work for you. But
can I give a very short aside? Would that be okay?
Yes.
At one point, Marvel Adventures, I think it was doing reprints with new art of the old like Stan Lee, Ditko, Amazing Spider-Man stuff. And when I first saw it come into the shop, I was still working there. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be sweet! Like, new art, like just kind of jazz it up. Yeah. Why not? Like, those are perfect stories to get the kids." But I had this thought where I was like, "Well, but maybe they'll do a little editing on the writing, because there was such egregious thought bubble exposition." And at one point, I opened up a thing, and I'm like, "Nope, they did not remove the thought bubbles." And it was like the first appearance of Sandman and Spider-Man. So the art in the panel is Spider-Man is reaching for a vacuum cleaner. And he's saying to himself, "I'm going to grab this vacuum cleaner."
Yeah. No,
oh, thanks.
I know.
I was so unsure of what was happening there.
And I think that is like, that's an era thing. And Claremont was in an era that was after that was like, we're going to write first, give it to the artists. We have like these big narratives in mind, like especially the soap opera style stuff that he was doing on X-Men was about the relationships and the dialogue that people were having and conversations and stuff. And I think that you see in European comics, you see a lot more dialogue and captions, at least in the French graphic novels I've read, and in manga.
Oh god.
Oh my! Some manga is just all words. Like it's so limited
or no words.
Well, I mean that's a thing too, and I think that stuff like shonen and shoujo, like the stuff that's for younger kids, or like young teenagers. It's like 12 to 14 or whatever. Like Naruto and like Boys Before Flowers or something would be a shoujo. They use a lot less writing because the Japanese language is complicated, and so not everyone can read at an expert level. So I think there's a lot of that has a lot to do with the fact that there are people that cannot read Japanese well that live in Japan and like work in Japan and speak Japanese fine, but they don't read it as well. I think there's part of the culture that's like that, and I don't know a ton about that, but there is some manga that is very, very dialogue heavy. Whereas Naruto is just like super action fast. You can flip the pages really quick because it's meant for like a younger kid.
I feel like you're seeing a lot of that experimentation even in mainstream comics now. I feel like I think you're right. I feel like you could. Well, I mean, we were talking about this with Avengers Forever, right? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Footnotes and subtext and all these things. But I think what's happened now is that you've got so many more diverse artists and writers that you end up with things like. I remember we're just reading that, and I haven't read the series yet, Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, where they just did like an entire issue where it's like done in ASL imagery. Yeah. You know, and then of course, I don't know if you guys remember this, but years ago...
they also did one where it was told from the perspective of the dog, so there's no dialogue.
Yeah, it's like all symbology and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, then like Marvel did that thing years ago with like the Nuff Said, where there was like no dialogue.
Several times.
Love the Nuff Said stuff.
So, I mean, I think there's that, and I think you're right. There are, Toby, I think you're right that there's a lot of creators right there who are seeing prominence, who are kind of going for this almost backlash against the modern or late Silver Age, where there was copious text, and now they're like, why say anything if the art can carry us all the way?
Right.
But then you got people like Bendis who are still kind of holdovers, who he likes to have more exposition. He has more overt narrative and interior monologue stuff. I mean, hell, he even brought back thought bubbles for Mighty Avengers with Frank Cho.
Yeah.
He never met a panel that he can shove an extraneous word bubble into.
I happen to like a lot of Bendis' work, so I'm not willing to go along on that ride with you.
I think
I like Bendis on certain books. I think Bendis speak is a real thing. It's an actual phenomenon that happens, and in some books that really works well, and in other books it doesn't work as well.
I also like Jeff Johns from time to time. But I can say that in this episode and not have Joe try to strangle me.
From home, he just felt like a pain in his heart. He was like, someone meant...
My phone
Joe
went off
bashes a minute ago with a text message.
I really liked Jeff Johns' Teen Titans.
I did too.
My phone went off with a text message, and it was actually Joe asking if Brant was saying nice things about Jeff Johns. There were several exclamation points.
Wow. Yep. That man can tell
friendship.
When someone likes Jeff Johns.
I kind of miss narration in between the panels. Like in the gutters, they would have the narration boxes so that it didn't take up art space. Do any of you guys remember that?
Yeah, I remember they would do it in the side panels, not so much in the gutters.
Well, for a long time, the gutters would be like they'd be extra wide, or like a bit of the panel would be cut out, and the narration box would be on top. Like they were attached to the corners or the sides of the panel, or like a panel would just be really small, and there would be text in the white space between panels.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, narration boxes became detached from the edge of the panel and would like float around inside of it. And I think a lot of that happened when narration boxes changed from being narration to being internal monologue.
Right. Which you can see on both sides. Yeah, it's interesting. I was actually just flipping back through the book we're actually supposed to be talking about, Queen and Country.
In a way,
being on topic?
Yeah, being on topic.
Yeah, we don't do that.
Pshaw.
Oh, I was just noticing, I had forgotten that other than the kind of the, like location placard style stuff, there is no overarching narration.
Right, and there's no internal monologue.
No, there is very little in the first issue.
Oh, yeah, she's like journaling, sort of. It looks like a journal.
Yeah, kind of, but obviously she can't be journaling because she's running for her life. But there is interior.
She's saying things like, gotta run over here.
Yeah, Weldon's got to know by now, too. Wonder who won that fight. Time to go.
Right. Yeah,
Too much. Hope the keys are in. Yeah, but of course that's issue 1, and I don't think he does it ever again.
And the one.
Yeah, he does actually.
I think that there is an
limited,
ongoing, just a little bit of internal monologue.
The point in which I feel like it's used the most effectively is when he doesn't use it, and that's when it's all going down basically with the Russians, and she's leaving the safe house to go take out those guys, and there aren't narration for a lot of that.
And I think that actually helps that scene. I think it increases the dramatic tension of it, because it's just these things are happening, and they're happening quickly, and you're not slowed down by copious amounts of dialogue or internal monologuing. It's just panel, thing happening.
Yeah.
Like, he uses a narration box.
About it, there is like quite a bit, because like even in the scene where the guy starts shooting and she's charging forward, she even says that like in her head. She's
it's the way he uses it in conjunction with the panels he doesn't use them in that works for me. So like, you'll get one and it'll slow you down enough on that panel that you stop, and then the next three won't have one.
And it actually works really well because he's doing it in the moment that the guy is firing.
Yeah.
And you get that sense of like time slowing down.
Yeah.
As these bullets are whizzing by, and she's narrating where before and after that things are moving really fast.
Yeah.
It's actually I think that's a very subtle technique, and I think it works well.
I like it.
There is something else that I wanted to talk about in conjunction with this story, and specifically when it came out. The first issue came out in March 2001, like 6 months before 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this series kind of got wrapped up and it evolved through the changing world circumstances that were actually going on at the time. Mm-hmm. And on the one hand, I think it was incredibly fortuitous timing for Greg Rucka. It's probably not for all the thousands and thousands of people who died during that period so much, but good for him that you had all of these world events going on that kind of merged well with the ideas that he was already working with. But I feel like this story stands out a little bit in that it is in the immediate pre-9/11 era, and the groups that they're dealing with and the things that they're concerned about start shifting very, very quickly.
Yeah, they're Russians in this one.
They do. Although, what I'm reminded of that you're talking about this now is that one of the first novel, which would be Mission, I think 7 or 8.
Is that the one where they're in
Georgia?
Yes.
Which is just kind of interesting because, of course, Georgia's being compared a lot to the Ukraine conflict. And Greg's kind of a funny guy to talk to about this stuff because he often muses on his Tumblr and out loud in person. Like, I think he's surprised sometimes that more people haven't taken opportunities to write some of these kinds of stories because there's so many incidences that you could just point at and be like, there's a story.
Yeah.
Like, and I think sometimes he's just kind of marveled at the fact that based on his, because it's clear that from talking to him that he knows folks who know things about this stuff. Like, these are stories that are informed by someone who has some glimpse into how these things function on a certain level.
He has a lot of people that he interviews, and like essentially if you were writing like a crime, like a cop story, you do like ride-alongs or whatever.
Right.
But like obviously he's not going to the front, but he's talking to guys that were just there.
Right. So I think sometimes he kind of muses out loud, like even knowing the things that he knows, he's like, why hasn't some of these kinds of other things happened? Because it would be so easy. But like at one point on his Tumblr, on his Tumblr, which I follow him on, he had like a week where he's like, here's another story that you could just take and run with. And it was like, 6 guys break into National Vault and steal the names of every citizen of whatever country. He's like, have a field day, folks. Like, there's a spy thriller waiting to happen.
I mean, to kind of jump off of Toby's comment about the 9/11. 9/11 changed our perspective of the global conflict, I think, a lot in America because it made it so relevant to us as Americans.
Well, it's not just that it made it relevant, it made us aware. Because all of these things were going on before that happened.
Right.
And nobody was really paying
I guess
attention
it's
to it.
in a very similar way to, there were a lot of people probably in the 1930s that were like not as knowledgeable about what was going on in the global conflict in Europe because it's so distant from us, right? But the minute that Pearl Harbor happens, suddenly as a nation, like more people are aware of what's going on. I think that 9/11 did that. But this kind of stuff has always been going on. And I think that's what Greg is kind of talking about, is like there are always conflicts and dirty dealings and people that don't like another people for a reason XYZ or need thing XY. Like this kind of stuff is always going on in the world, and the global, what do they call that, foreign policy of countries, and there's a lot that went on post World War II that is very American centric, right? Like America's out doing stuff around the world. We're in South America in the 50s and toppling regimes and putting
not just regimes. South America,
right?
All over the fucking world. We were up to dirty tricks for decades.
There's a lot of stuff in South America.
You mean defending freedom?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
Defending freedom.
Defending freedom.
Well, more destroying communism than defending freedom. Really.
Yeah, defending freedom
and,
by
like selling drugs and shipping arms.
Getting rid of
people.
democratically elected leaders in order to get the Dole Pineapple Corporation into places. Sure.
But it was important to do those things because the communists were winning.
Well, they were democratically elected, but okay.
Doesn't matter, because you can democratically elect communists, and we all know what happens when you do that.
Yeah.
Chaos in the streets.
Every other country immediately surrounding that country becomes communist. Every time.
That's right.
100%.
Well, the only reason they didn't is because we did all that stuff.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Jeez, guys.
Yeah.
Read a book.
What is that they call that effect? So in Vietnam, the whole purpose, quote unquote,
domino effect.
Right, the domino effect, right? So if we can save one country from communism, what we're doing is we're stopping other countries.
The notion of a metaphorical fight, right? Like we take out communists there, it shows the weakness of their regime,
right,
etc., so on and so forth.
Because they believe that if Vietnam became a communist state, that surrounding states would become a communist.
But other ones then would defiantly try to join the Red Menace.
Yeah, jump ahead many years to the Middle East, in which we attempted to democratize a single country in the effect that, like, oh, if we do this to one country, like, all the other countries will want to be democratic. It's the same thing that we learned didn't work in the 70s.
Foreign policy has not changed
bullshit.
radically in decades. It's the same shitheads doing the same shit.
Well,
decade after decade after decade.
It's that double speak, right? It's like they tell you, "Oh, we're going for freedom and whatever," and it's like clearly we're not. But
there were reasons I occasionally was a bad fit at the college I was in, and this might be an illustrative of that.
Yeah,
it is complicated, and it's. Yes, there is a doublespeak component there. One of the things that I think makes Queen and Country compelling over time is that you get to see that Rucka does a very good job of at least presenting that there are real people making counter arguments to each other, even ones that might seem counterintuitive, but because they believe in a fundamental like observation of like how things work. Like even in the first couple of series of Queen and Country, the Brits ask the Americans for some things, and at first the Americans are like, well, not really, because we don't care.
Right.
But increasingly, what happens over time is that the Brits ask for certain things, and they keep getting rebuffed, because it's like, well, we really don't care about that. We have bigger fish to fry. And then at one point, the Americans are like, well, you give us what we want, and we'll help you, but we need to know more about this place or this place, and we don't have an in, but you do because of all your old ties to these Muslim countries and agents and all these things. And so it's like even allies have competing interests and perspectives on what they think is a good idea, and it's like that's the that is the problem with democracy, quote unquote, is that you get a lot of different people with different ideas. Like there were people who fundamentally believed in the domino theory, right? They fundamentally believed that there would be nuclear winter brought on by a crashing red wave of communist fury if things like Vietnam were lost. That doesn't, it's easy for our generation to be very cynical about that stuff. And there should be cynicism and questioning of those things, I think, personally. But I think it's easy to be like, what morons, when it's like there had never really been a power dynamic like that in the world. And I think that to bring this full circle back to the 9/11 thing, I think that it was so easy post the fall of communism to be like, well, we won. Fucking A. See? It's not sustainable. No one can touch us. And Osama bin Laden had done stuff, and they had destroyed they hit the USS Cole, and so like we knew he was out there, but I think 9/11 was the first time where it's like, oh, these complex things that seem minor and trivial compared to this great monolithic evil, it can touch us. We can be touched. We are not supreme.
Well, and also,
that's scary shit. I mean,
I agree.
People handle it poorly. I don't think invading the Middle East was a good way to go.
But again, it's very similar to what's going on in Queen Country. Is like you, with the best intentions, you fully intend to do something that will further your cause. Like, for example, setting up a small militant band of freedom fighters in Afghanistan, and we're going to arm them so that they can now fight against the Russians.
That's right.
And
that'll be awesome.
That'll be great. Like, the best possible intentions. Like they're going to fight for us. Like, we'll just help them out. Like, they need guns. We have guns. It'll be easy, right? And then
20 years later.
Whoa, wow. Those are our guns that they're shooting at us.
Ah, crap.
Why did that...
I want to agree with you, and I want to bring it back around to Queen and Country.
Yeah.
What's his name? The guy who's head of operations. Is it...
It's not Tim, is it? Which one is it?
Whatever, the guy with the black hair.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. Like, he starts out this...
Chase's boss.
He starts
Crocker or Wallace?
Crocker.
Director of Ops. Yeah.
Crocker. He starts out this thing like, we're going to assassinate this guy because it's going to be great and it's going to solve all these problems because he's a really bad guy. And that immediately comes and bites them in the ass in terms of them getting a rocket shot at them. And then what's his reaction to that? They came at us. We have to punish these people because if we don't, it's going to show weakness and more people are going to come after us.
Which is...
There's a very specific kind of mentality and ideology that takes place in places like this that turn into policy decisions of countries.
Yeah.
And I think that this series very intentionally gives you a look at the sort of people that are doing these things and the way that their actions have consequences that we can look from, 500 yards away.
Yeah.
Monday, armchair quarterback, whatever. Like, that was a stupid thing to do. And in hindsight, maybe it was a stupid thing to do. But the people who were there, who were doing this job, think in a certain way, they act in a certain way, and they only know certain things.
Right. And that's a good point because, like, we often, I mean, and this book is a great example of that, but we often are like, oh, the government did this, the military did that. Those are people making decisions that, like you said, they get carried up and they become policy. And I am so adamantly opposed to Crocker's thinking in this book when he's just like, oh, well, and it comes from a lot of the fact that, like, I would like to, in my heart, be a pacifist. That, the best way to solve this problem is to kill him real good. Kill him dead. And then other people will be afraid of that. It's that shock and awe, right? Like, they'll be afraid of that.
Right.
And they will not fuck with us anymore. And inside, I'm like, well, you can't just kill it. Like, there is judicial process is supposed to occur. Like,
never comes into the equation.
It doesn't come into the equation. And again, he has right to be worried about that because he knows that somebody's making shady deals to ship these guys back to Russia, and that it's all going to get swept under the rug, and no justice will be served, and people will still continue to make runs at their MI6. And by the end of the book, I'm agreeing with him. And I think that that's a strength of the writing in this book is that I'm like, I guess, he was kind of right.
It gets even better when you actually, like, much later, you get to see flashbacks to him as a young agent, as a minder himself in East Berlin.
Are those
like back in the Cold War?
The declassifieds?
Yeah, that is a great series, and I think it really changes your reading of Queen and Country as a whole after you've gone through those events with him and you understand where he came from and why he thinks in the way that he does.
And I think that that's what Brant is talking about when he's talking about, like, that long-term character development. And I think it's great. And I think it's, when we were talking about TV, the one thing I wanted to mention was, like, the closest you ever got to stuff like this on TV in, like, a pre-2000, in the 90s, 2000s, was, like, X-Files, where you would have these of the week kind of made for syndication type Monster of the Week shows where it's like, they're hunting a ghost from the whatever. But then you have this character arc for Mulder and Scully that will continue through the episodes. It may not always get touched on, but at some points, like, major events will happen that will change the way they feel about what their final end goal is.
Right.
And it wasn't just X-Files. There were a few shows during that period, and the one that comes to my mind most is Babylon 5.
And that feels ahead of its time in a lot of
ways.
It was
way ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Way ahead of its time.
It's J. Michael Straczynski.
Yeah. And I think that was when we started to see a shift towards this.
Yeah, that was the one where he had all the aliens walk across the United States to find out how the average man was, right?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm mixing that up. I love you, Jim Michael. Sigh.
He still has good in him.
We're sorry about Thor. We're just sorry that happened to you, bro. We're sorry Bendis needed to play with all your toys and you didn't get to finish telling your story.
Which is too bad because that was actually a pretty good
great
story.
I actually really liked what he was doing on Spider-Man until he got
one more date. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh.
It's such
That
a
guy
shame.
has the worst luck with Marvel.
Yeah.
It's not just Marvel. It's everything that he does.
I think it might be a confluence thing because he's really good at starting stories. I don't know that he's so hot at ending them.
We were talking about this about Rising Stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I love the beginning of Rising Stars, but by the time it gets to the end, I'm like, And The Other, which is his big contribution to Spider-Man, like, it starts off kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Which is funny enough, what they're doing now will come back to that, because the whole Spider-Verse thing is...
Well, they're...
Oh, yeah.
What's his name? Ezekiel and Moreland are back.
Yeah.
Which you talked about on top of the stack.
I did talk about that on top of the stack, because I loved Superior Spider-Man issue number 32.
That was a good issue.
Well, because I was like, the Spider-Verse is going to be dumb. And then I read that issue and I was like, it's going to be awesome! So,
you couldn't see it, but Chard's eyes just got as big as his head.
yeah, that happens sometimes. Did you guys... The one part of the book I think that we haven't talked about at all is the coloring. Did you guys want to talk about that at all?
It was in black and white.
Yeah, it was. We didn't mention that at all. It is a black and white book. If you didn't realize...
Did I read the wrong thing?
And the thing that I think is interesting about the black and white is it is like black and white, like line art.
Yeah, there's no gray
and background. There's no gray tone.
Yep.
There's no shading,
cross-hatching.
really. Like, it's black and white.
But that's not true for the rest of the series. No. So, yeah, it's very much... And that's the thing. Oh, that's what I was saying about the sketches in the back.
Yeah.
There was a rougher look to them. I almost wish they would have kept them.
Yeah, this feels like it was intended to be colored. Like, I got the inks, and then, like...
Yeah.
Oh, cool. When is the color being put on? Oh, it's not. Oh, it looks like it skipped a step. And I think that's another part of it that makes it feel kind of amateur to me, because if you were intending to do a black and white book, I think that even if he had known he was doing a black and white book, the artist may have done a rougher style, like in his sketches. Maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I'm trying to
Interesting to think
remember which volume it is. I want to say volume 7. There's an artist that looks very similar to this that is used, but it is more dynamic in almost every way. Not quite as like cartoony, but still black and white, simple lines. Like it feels very similar, and I don't think it's Rolston again, but it could be him years later. But even that, I think, captured some of that action stuff better.
Yeah.
So it can be done with this black and white simple style. It's just...
Well, is it Christopher Mitten that does The Wasteland? He does like a very similar style, where it's like very thin line and like not a lot of shading, and it's black and it's white, and it is very stark. And a lot of that was to do with the fact that it was a book called Wasteland. But it can be done, because he's done a crime. Christopher Mitten did a crime. He illustrated like a crime story that called Past Lives that I think was really dynamic and fluid. But it was similar to this, where it's just like line art, white backgrounds. And the backgrounds are really void in this too. There's another reason that makes it feel amateur. Is there's like not a lot of stuff in the background. So I don't know. That's all I have to say about art.
It feels very TV-ish in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like, there are only the things there that you need to see.
Yeah.
And I guess when I say TV-ish, I mean more old TV.
Yeah. Like, wow, there's only a pedestal with a telephone in this scene. I wonder if the phone's going to ring.
Totally.
It doesn't, but...
No.
Ring, ring, ring.
Spoilers.
So is there anything else that we wanted to say about Queen and Country, or do we want to move on to recommendations?
I'm good to Rex.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much more to say. It's a good series.
Read the rest. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely read the rest of us. And I would like
I just
to...
felt that it went by too fast.
Yeah.
I would like to talk about this on a long run sometime.
Me too.
Because I think that there's a lot to talk about in the later volumes. And I might even be down to reread the books. I don't know.
Yeah, again, I'm going to try to find that reading list that Chris Niesman, who's a huge fan of the series, it's his recommend of Around Comics. It was his recommended reading list for the series. I wrote it down like several times. I've written it down because I've intended to read this series in his reading order.
Yeah, definitely.
And he puts the declassifieds and the novels in, and he puts them in specific spots so that you don't know stuff early. And Rucka has never really released an official reading order of it. And
talk about that. Actually, was basically you could rely on the publishing to a certain extent because since it was only him producing it, like they came out basically in the order that they were to be.
But going back you have no idea, right?
So are the declassifieds not part of the 32 issue run?
No. Okay. They are about the head of operations.
One's about Crocker, one's about Wallace, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I
and they are flashbacks.
Yeah.
So they're like declassified files.
Yeah,
like
so
the backup
all of Queen and Country proper is about Tara Chace. I mean, as like the focal point character. Obviously, there are other characters, but then the
so
declassified
that's the 32 issues and the zero.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to get
3 books.
And 3 books, and the books go in between issues.
Okay.
So that's why it's confusing. Is only because, like Brant said, as it was coming out, it's really easy to follow. You just get whatever's out. But reading it now, when there are, how many volumes of the series? Like 6? And then there's like, 7?
8.
Yeah, I think you're right, 8.
And then there's a bunch of declassified volumes. And then
2
there's
declassified volumes, 8 trades, and 3 books.
Right.
I believe.
What Brant said. So I'll try to find that list, and I'll try to post it on the description of the episode that is attached to this. So
yeah, I think we can do that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name of the 3rd book because it's Gentleman's Game, Private Wars, and something else.
I don't know. You're looking at me like I know things. I hate it when people do that.
And there may be a movie coming out at some point.
Yeah.
I think this would make a much better television show.
Yes.
I agree.
To be honest.
Yes. And Ellen Page has been rumored to be attached as Tara Chace, which I like Ellen Page. I don't see her as Tara Chace. But
yeah, it seems like an odd choice.
I also feel
Greg
like
Rucka seemed pretty pleased with it. So
well, she's a very good actress. She actor. I would almost like to prefer to see this on television for the reason that you would not see like, oh, this is a movie about Ellen Page. You would get somebody that's less well known.
Well, then you could spend the time to do all of the development.
Yeah, exactly.
In a big way.
Yeah. So that's. It feels like TV, and I can see the influence of stuff like Sandbaggers. Like this feels like 1, maybe 2 episodes of a television show. That first trade, it's like short and sweet.
What's the name of the woman who played Galadriel in Lord of the Rings?
Kate Blanchett.
Yeah,
yes, Kate Blanchett. Kate Blanchett seems like a Tara Chace to me, although she might be older at this point. I'm not sure how old she is.
Fantasy cast, I would pick Starbuck from
Katie
Sackhoff.
Yeah, that would be pretty good.
Tough as nails.
Yeah,
I could see it.
Yeah.
I would want to see. I don't know. I can imagine a couple of actresses. I would want a Brit, an actual Brit.
Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, I guess I trust Katie Sackhoff to be trainable enough to get her British accent on.
Could happen. I mean, that would make.
I've been watching Longmire. I love her on that.
Yeah. I think she's a good actress.
Katie Sackhoff for Captain Marvel 2016. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that she's going to be way too busy being in the imaginary Captain Marvel movie than the imaginary Queen and Country movie.
Yeah. TV
it's
show.
like a fantasy football league, except for casting characters in movies.
We should do a fantasy draft for Marvel characters. We did that when I was in college before like all the Avengers and Iron Man had even come out. We like did a fantasy cast of our Avengers. It was fun.
Yeah, that might be something to do.
I got a character that's in the movie but not in the correct role. I wanted who plays Hawkeye? It's
Jeremy Renner.
I wanted Renner as Captain America. After 28 Weeks Later, seeing him as like a soldier character, I was like, "Yep, that's who I'd pick." But he makes a great Hawkeye, though. So,
I did not like Chris Evans the first time I saw him, which was as Johnny Storm in Fantastic Four.
I thought he was perfect as Johnny
But then
Storm.
Brant and I were sitting down and we were watching Sunshine,
yeah,
which is an awesome movie. And his character's like an asshole through most of the movie. And we're like, man, fuck you, Johnny Storm. You're a dick.
Yeah.
And then I'm not going to spoil the movie, but some things happen that make him more relatable. And we're like, fuck yeah, go Johnny Storm.
Yeah.
That movie's great.
That movie's amazing. It's one of my favorites.
Completely
Johnny
changed
Storm
my opinion, not only of that
the Scarecrow.
character, but of Chris Evans as an actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I always, for whatever reason, when I think about Chris Evans, like if I just kind of, his name is mentioned, I think of his biggest roles. But if I think about him for too long, I think of, is it Not Another Teen Movie? Which is like the parody of She's All That.
Yeah,
where he's like, not Janie Briggs. She has glasses and paint on her coveralls, but he's like this like hyper douchey guy.
He's playing the Freddie Prinze Jr. analogy. Yeah. Which he's great at.
Yeah, he's really good
at. Yeah, my favorite thing, this is a really funny old interview, but Chris Evans did a movie with Anna Faris once, and when they were on the press tour, all that he would talk about on the press tour was Chris Pratt, who's not in the movie, but was married to Anna Faris and would hang out with them.
That's awesome.
And he's like, I just want to hang out with your funny husband more. And it's like this really weird old clip to go see now.
I think he was also in Push.
Yeah, he was in Push, yeah.
Which, I love that movie.
Yeah, I really wish
I haven't seen that one.
And he was good in that. It's really good.
I mean, it's got...
Let's talk about Chris Evans more.
Yeah, let's do that.
How about
bonus episode number 4, the Chris Evans podcast.
Yeah. Spoilers. Last night I recorded from like 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. with the Out of the Fridge crew for some episodes for September. And then I went to work at 4 a.m. So I'm very tired, but last night was every episode was a just tangent episode. So
excellent.
Still in that mindset, man.
Sounds about right.
I can't shake it. All right.
Recommendations.
Yeah, Toby, why don't you start?
Sure. So I brought back a book that I think I pitched once before. I might have pitched
5
it a second
times.
time, but
5
Brant
times
pitched
before.
Queen and Country like 3 weeks in a row, so I feel justified.
It was 2.
So I brought back
Justified.
Prince of Cats by
yeah.
Ron Wimberly.
You've brought this at least 3 times, I think.
No, I think this is the 3rd time.
Okay.
But I was reading it again this afternoon, and I fucking love this book. It's so good. And if you haven't heard my previous pitches on it, this is basically him taking Romeo and Juliet, set in like 1984 in Brooklyn with black street youth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all told from Tybalt's perspective. And it's got this really awesome, super colorful, like very graffiti-inspired style.
And they even speak in iambic.
Yeah, and the whole thing is written in iambic pentameter, and it's mostly like true to the play dialogue, but then there are like insertions that are, some of which is kind of more modern speech, some of which is in iambic pentameter, but I was just flipping through. There's a scene where they're talking in like Shakespearean English, iambic pentameter, about how to give blowjobs, which is fucking hilarious. Or telling the joke about Superman fucking the Invisible Man in the ass.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to repeat, but is pretty funny. And it's a great book. The art is great. The writing is super good. You got to spend a little bit of time to understand it because a lot of it is Shakespearean English, but there's a lot to get out of this book. And I think Ron Wimberly is a great creator who needs more credit. He recently did a couple of issues of Prophet with Brandon Graham, which were also super good. So if you've been following Prophet, you've seen his art, and it works really well in this book.
Anytime you say Shakespearean English, I just think of that scene from Avengers. Now that we're on that topic, with where he finds Thor and Loki, and he's like, "What is this? Shakespeare in the Park?" It's like, "Doth mother know you wear her drapes?" to Thor. Makes me laugh every time.
Yes.
Brent,
I always think of Andrew Chard's. Do you take my point? I take your point.
I left that in. I didn't know if that would work.
Yeah, no, you left.
Can't remember where it's from, but there's some comic where Thor is going, "What dost thou say?" or whatever, and somebody turns to him and he's like, "Damn it, Thor, you know proper English."
He's just been spending too much time in Asgard. He forgets.
Yeah. Anyway, what'd you bring, Brent?
I'm deciding to start a small project where I will alternate books between ones that I have, because I still have quite a few to bring to the table, but also ones that I have access to but have not yet read.
Nice.
So I want to pitch Northlanders.
Ooh.
First trade, which is called Spend the Return. I've heard great things about this.
Once on the show, maybe before.
Yes, I believe that it's on the big reading list on the website. So
anyway, it's written by Brian Wood, illustrated by Davide Gianfelice, I believe. Sorry, whoever you are, for mangling your name so horribly.
It's tradition.
But I've heard a lot about the series. Like I said, I've had access to it for a long time, but it's never like the thing I grab off my shelf to read. But I want to. And it's about Vikings. And Brian Wood does the same thing that Rucka does, which is choose different artists for different arcs. So I thought it was at least vaguely thematically appropriate follow-up in my recommendation.
However, unlike Queen and Country, each volume is about a different
it's actually a different story.
Yeah. Sven the Return, the story, if you don't know, is he's a Viking who has gone away...
Serving in the Byzantine Empire.
Yes, to the bustling big city. And he is now very cultured and does not really approve of his upbringing. And he comes back to his homeland to find that his kind of shitty uncle has taken over. And it's his birthright. So there's the conflict between like his people, but he doesn't really want to stay there because he's not really from there. He feels
cosmopolitan.
He feels like that's not his place anymore. So it's kind of that fish out of water story. And I really enjoyed that one. I thought that was fun. And the art is very Vertigo, but it's good.
Excellent.
Cade?
So I brought a book that we briefly talked about on the Hawaiian Dick episode.
Yes, it's been recommended before as well.
This has been recommended on the show before, I believe twice.
Yeah.
And this is Richard Stark's Parker, the Hunter, and the Outfit. I brought both, I brought the first two books, which is what I have.
There's going to be 4 total. I think there are 3 out now.
There are 4 out.
Okay, then that's it.
But no, there is one in the works.
Really? Okay, so there's 6 books. There's 6 books in the Parker series that Richard Stark wrote.
And these are adaptations of those?
And Darwin Cook is doing the adaptation, both writing and art, and he said that he was going to adapt 4 of those, and then he put in Man with the Getaway Face as a single issue. He released it, and that is collected in the second one in the Outfit, and you need to know that story because something happens in the Man with the Getaway Face that affects the third story, which is the second, which is the Outfit. You don't need to know all
Can I
of
just
the
watch
stuff.
the Jason Statham movie?
You
That
can
just
watch,
give me where that wants to go?
what's the one that Mel Gibson did?
Yeah, it's I forget the
Payback.
name. But
Payback.
Yeah, it's the same character.
Yeah,
even though he's called Parker in that one.
Yeah, that's what he's called in this
Or
one.
no,
He's
maybe
called
it's the
something
old one from like the '60s where he's called Porter.
Yeah, that is.
The new Jason Statham one is the only movie he's actually named Parker, and that is because after Donald Westlake's death, they no longer had to ask his permission if they could use the name.
I just remember that there have been 3 different movies,
Yes.
and his name has changed from one to the next.
There have been a lot of movies, actually. There's a list on Wikipedia and what they changed the name to. But this was actually Donald Westlake's first and only time he let the adapter use the name Parker.
Yeah.
For the adaptation.
Cool.
The Mel Gibson one is supposed to be the most like faithful in spirit adaptation, only if you watch the director's cut ending and not the theatrical cut ending, or the other way around. I don't remember which one.
I think it's the director's cut that's the good one.
Okay, yeah, because they changed the end.
Joe would know if he was here because he just watched it.
Yeah,
I don't think I've seen the director's cut of that movie.
Yeah,
From what I understand, it's pretty different.
Yeah, the end is more faithful to the book in one version over the other. This series is great. Darwin Cook's awesome.
Yeah. So I haven't actually pitched the book.
Yeah.
But it's the story of a criminal who gets screwed over by his team.
His crew.
Yeah, and then goes on a revenge spree to get his money that he's due. And it's very, very well thought out.
Yeah, this is in a lot of ways the quintessential crime fiction story, American crime fiction.
Well, it's
stories.
a revenge story.
Yeah, when you talk about crime fiction, Richard Sargent Parker, the series Parker will be brought up. So,
well, he's like real principled in his very interesting way.
Yeah,
Yes.
As with all crime fiction, something we talk about when we talk about detective fiction, but as with all crime fiction, they all have a moral code.
Not necessarily
It
your
is
moral code.
Different than your moral code, but that's what makes them compelling characters, is there are rules they will not break.
Man's got to have a code.
Yeah, you gotta have rules. There's boundaries you won't cross.
That's why I always think of Payback when he's on the phone with what's his name, and he's like, I want, what is it, $250,000? He's like, well, just take the thing. It's like worth $1 million something. He's like, no, look, do you people not listen to me? I want my money. Yeah. I want this exact amount of money. I don't want any money. They're like, what? It's like, look, just the way that has to be.
Yes.
Anyway.
Exactly that.
Ooh,
and this is not a modernization of the story.
No, it is New York City, 1962.
Yeah.
At least the first one is.
Yeah, and it's beautiful.
Nice.
Yeah, black and white as well.
Well,
Chart?
black, blue, and white.
Yeah, but I guess what I mean is line art, no colors.
Yes.
So what did you bring, Chard?
Oh, I brought a book that released today, as of the release of this episode, not as of the recording. And it is called The Fuse, Volume 1, The Russia Shift. This is week whatever of my weeks of image thing that I'm...
Week N+1.
I'm gonna look it up at some point, but it's called the
not.
Russian.
You say that
I know.
single
I really
episode.
will, though.
Are you going to cut this out of the episode?
No, it'll be like week 48, and I'll finally look it up, and then I'll know when I can stop doing this.
And then we'll know what we're counting down to.
Yeah. So this is Anthony Johnston. I talked about Christopher Mitten earlier, the artist of Wasteland and The Umbral and Past Lives. This is the writer of Wasteland and The Umbral, Anthony Johnston, who wrote those series with Christopher Mitten, and the artist Justin Green is who did Resurrection, which was another Image series.
Oh yeah.
And this is the Fuse is a space station in space. This is a sci-fi story, and it orbits the Earth, and people live there. It's like a big space colony kind of thing. Like there are citizens up there, not just scientists and.
Is it parked at one of the Lagrange points?
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
just hanging out up there.
I love Lagrange points.
It's so it's I actually don't know much about the science of the space station because I don't know how much they delve into it. Often in a book when they start talking about science, I just gotta skip over it because
you've been up all night.
Yeah, I'm up on that recording. So I don't have time. No, I like the science, but it's hard for me to determine what is just like technobabble and what's actual science sometimes. So I just kind of treat it all like it's the same thing and continue on with the plot of the story.
It actually really it is the same thing.
Yeah.
Joe likes to pretend that facts are real, but that's just made up
To
by
my
science
brain
wizards.
that doesn't know enough about science to tell the difference, it is identical. Like it might as well be made up. I'm pretty sure that there is hyperspace travel, like that we have warp drive. I just don't know. I don't know. It could happen. You could convince me of it.
No, Joe was actually arguing the opposite, that nothing is truly fact.
Yeah.
Which I did actually, I forgot. I wanted to apologize for.
Dude, don't apologize to Joe.
Never.
Why on
once.
God's green earth would you apologize to him?
Yeah, don't do that.
And I'm not saying that because of the way that these guys are saying it, like, screw Joe. I'm saying, like, he was wrong. And I'm putting this on the podcast.
I'm also saying that, too, because Joe's always wrong.
Well, yes, but I'm saying it out of a more...
He did bring up a point in that people listening to this episode 6 months from now, what we consider fact might be different.
Yeah,
well,
yes.
I mean, like, that's the...
But that is a tacit understanding for anyone who's operating at that level of intellectual pursuit. If you are of an caliber of intellectual rigor where you give a shit about things being more temporary or transitional than what we would refer to colloquially as fact, you already will be making those assumptions.
Right, and for example, like, we may know a fact today. Tomorrow we may find out that, we were mistaken. That's not actually a fact. It doesn't make it not a fact today.
Correct.
Like, that is something that we know and can hold to. That we have to operate on a system where we believe that that's a fact today. Because if we didn't operate on that system, then we would just be like, well, I don't know. Does gravity work? Like,
Well, and it's just it becomes a thing that I think, and I've said this before on the podcast, where it's just like you get into the weird mire of academia thing where it's like, well, gravity is a theory. It's based on these things that we currently understand. Like, there's a lot of soft language, which is great when you're sitting in a room full of scientists talking about the theory of gravity. But when every day we're walking around being like, look, I dropped this shit and it falls to the ground. It looks like gravity's working.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
My thing that I was bringing up on the episode that we didn't get to was, for example, I think it works negatively the other way. If you're so soft about facts and you're like, oh, the theory of evolution opens the door for a lot of not intelligent people to go, well, it's just a theory. My theory is that a magic wizard made it. Like, no, it's not a theory like that. Like, it's a theory. No,
all wizards are magic.
That is true. Some are more magical than others.
See, that is a fact right there.
That is a true wizard fact.
True wizard facts.
There's magic wizards and more magic wizards.
Right.
You ever heard of a non-magic wizard, fool? All right.
Well, there are muscle wizards.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, this wizard. There's also science wizards. Fuck you.
I referred to science wizards earlier in this episode. No, rewind the tape.
No,
I won't. The point being, like, evolution happened. Like, it's a fact. We still call it a theory, but, like, that did happen. And so to soften it by saying, like, oh, the theory of evolution, like, it opens the door for a lot of uneducated critique of something. And so, in my opinion, language should be used in a way that it is most useful to convey your fact.
And I wanted to I understand. Like, Joe doesn't want people walking away being like, well, they said this thing about that merman, it must be true. I'll just operate with my life thinking that. It's like,
no one listens to the show expecting us to
and that was my ultimate point, was that I don't think Cade has to apologize for using the word fact because he's, going to be seeding the masses with disinformation that is going to affect their day-to-day operational lives.
Pretty sure that if you check the bylaws of View from the Gutters, it is our official podcast policy that we know jack all shit about most everything.
Yeah.
And that you cannot take anything that we say on this on this podcast as given truth.
I'm convinced that I say more wrong information than I say correct information. So, that being said, this book is actually by Anthony Johnson and Justin Green because I looked it up and wrote it down.
Excellent.
Which is the only way to make things real.
So, aside from being on a space station,
yes,
this book about?
No, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. They're on a space station.
It's just panel to panel of people on the space station.
There are people that have moved up there. They've kind of immigrated to this space station, and it's a multicultural space station. A lot of people living up there. The Russia shift is in reference to these two homicide detectives that are working the Russia shift on the space station. So these specific hours that they're above Russia or this timeline, like, those are the times that they're on the clock. And so there's a murder. A tunneler or a homeless guy that lives in the ducts in the space station, like in the venting and things that carry the cable and water and everywhere. Like, they live in these spaces in between the levels of the space station, basically. He ends up dead.
Like inside the bulkhead.
Yeah, basically he's just kind of wandering around in the places that people aren't supposed to go. And, which is dangerous in a space station. What if you, like, accidentally turn the power off and everyone... Anyway. So they live in there. They're, like, the homeless of the space station. One of them dies. There is a tie to the, basically, governor or president of the space station in some way or another. So there's this political aspect. There is a... homicide investigation by these police officers, and it's cool. And when I say police officers, like a police investigation, I immediately, as many people do, think of like a cool buddy cop story. But the senior officer in this story is a woman. She's like a really hard-boiled police officer who works alone and plays by her own rules. No, but she is used to working alone. And there's a new guy who's, I think, ex-military, and they're going to delve into that more later. But he is moved up to the space stations for unknown reason. Like, he just suddenly relocated up there. So when they delve into his past more in the future ongoing stories, I think we'll find out more about that character. But he plays basically the young rookie, and he's following this woman, and they are investigating the murder. And it's a good series, and I really like it. So everyone should check it out.
Can I ask you one question about this? At the end of the first volume, does that like wrap up a complete story
arc?
Yeah,
that's the murder. That's the end of their shift. And I'm not convinced that the second story will be about the same characters because the way they title the book, like the shifts, and as far as like homicide shifts go, there may be like a day shift, so there may be like a different shift with different detectives. But the case
my big question
closed.
is like this doesn't end on like to be continued.
No. Case
like you
closed.
get a full story when you read this.
Yep. Case closed. End of the 5-issue arc.
I have another
important
6 question.
Yes.
How do you become the governor of a space station?
Yeah, I don't know. I want to know.
Presumably somebody votes for you.
I think he was elected.
Or appointed.
He's not like the pirate king of the space station,
if
which
the
is
space
cooler,
station is a territory.
Yes.
The governor could be appointed by the president, depending on who owns it.
How do you become the president of a space station?
Well, no, the president of whatever country is in control of the space station.
And this seems like the space station...
Like, if you're the governor of, like, U.S. Samoa or whatever, like, I'm pretty sure you're appointed.
The way that it seems in the story as I'm reading it, and again, I read this in singles, like, month to month, so my memory is not as strong on this series. The way I'm remembering it is that it operates as if it is its own independent country, basically. And so the laws of the space station apply only to the space station, and Earth law is different.
But this is a big space station. There's lots of people.
Real big. Yeah, and they're multicultural background, but they all live under this like one unified.
So this space station is like a country.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Okay. Yeah, and it's called the fuse because it looks like a fuse, like a light bulb fuse. Like it's long, narrow, and it's got like big round parts on each end.
Interesting.
Yeah, and the art's really strong in this. I think it's good. But yeah, this is the first case. They close the case at the end of this, and it's cool political intrigue and murder investigation.
So, shall I vote first?
Yes.
I'm going to vote for the fuse.
Sweet.
Brent?
I'll vote for the fuse.
Wow.
Gade?
I was also going to vote for the fuse.
I was not expecting that at all.
Hey?
I'm going to vote for Parker the Hunter and the outfit again.
I was going to vote for Parker,
I
but
always
the fuse sounds cool.
The fuse sounds awesome.
I can't argue with sci-fi.
It's fun. It is in a sci-fi setting. Is the like content super sci-fi? Not really.
No.
I mean, it is like in a sci-fi place though, so I guess it is sci-fi. But it's
Cool. All right. So
detectives in space.
Next week, the fuse.
Yes.
And the week after that, or a week and a half after that, Rose City.
Yes.
Check us out.
Yes. The 20th and the 21st.
Yeah, 20th and 21st. And we'll see you guys later.
Yep. Have a good night, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Me From the Gutters. I hope our recommendations have inspired you to go out and find some new comics you'll enjoy. Join us next time for a discussion of our selected title, but like every week, we encourage you to read all of the recommended books. In the meantime, please leave us an iTunes review. It really does help new listeners find the show. You can also like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us on Twitter at ViewFRTHGutters. Feel free to email us at contact@viewfromthegutters.com. Please send us any questions, comments, or recommendations you might have. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we post new videos every week. And thanks again for listening. And as always, keep reading.